The evidence shows that the funds were transferred directly into your account.
I will have you dragged out of this courtroom in chains. Do you have any idea who I am? The judge roared, his voice rattling the mahogany walls. The woman at the witness stand didn't flinch. She leaned forward, icy resolve in her eyes, and said in a razor-sharp whisper, "I know exactly who you are, Your Honor. The question is, do you remember who I am?" Judge Oscar Dunn's gavel froze in midair. The blood drained from his face. In that single instant, the apex predator of the Chicago legal system became the prey. The Dirksen Federal Courthouse in downtown Chicago was a monolith of glass and steel, a fortress designed to intimidate. To Oscar, it was simply his kingdom. Every morning he strode through the marble corridors, his Italian leather shoes clacking, bailiffs averting their eyes, junior attorneys murmuring nervously. He commanded absolute authority through fear, not respect. At 58, Oscar looked every bit the distinguished jurist. Silver hair styled weakly, Milan-tailored suits beneath his robes, posture rigid with self-importance. He was known as the executioner, a judge who handed down maximum sentences without remorse, denied bail to struggling single mothers, and mocked defendants who begged for leniency. But beneath the polished veneer of blind justice lay a rotting core of corruption. Oscar was not a self-made man. He was a bought man. For over 2 decades, his rise through the judiciary had been funded and protected by the Maroney crime syndicate and a network of corrupt politicians. In exchange for favorable rulings, suppressed evidence, and dismissed charges against syndicate members, his offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands grew fat. He owned a gated estate in Winnetka and a penthouse over Lake Michigan, and he believed himself untouchable. On this particular Tuesday, Courtroom 2544 was thick with tension. It was the preliminary hearing for a corporate embezzlement case involving Vanguard Logistics, a front company for the very people who padded Oscar's secret accounts. The defense attorneys, expensive and relaxed, knew the judge was in their pocket. The prosecution, led by an exhausted assistant U.S. attorney named Mark Henderson, looked defeated before the hearing even began. Oscar settled into his leather chair, already knowing exactly how the day would end. Sustain the defense's objections, strike the prosecution's financial documents on a manufactured technicality, dismiss the case for insufficient evidence. A script he'd played out a dozen times. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Oscar Dunn presiding. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Mr. Henderson, Oscar drawled, dripping condescension. I trust the prosecution has something more substantial today than the amateur conjecture you wasted my court's time with yesterday. Your Honor, we have uncovered new critical evidence, Henderson said. We've brought in an independent forensic auditor from the Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Task Force. She has traced the missing Vanguard funds to several shell companies. Oscar suppressed a smirk. Another numbers-crunching auditor. He'd destroyed dozens of them on the stand. Very well. Call your witness. Let us get this charade over with. The prosecution calls Ms. Olivia Bennett to the stand. The oak doors swung open. Oscar didn't look up at first, until the confident click of heels down the aisle sent an inexplicable chill over the back of his neck. Olivia Bennett walked down the aisle with the unhurried grace of an apex predator. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back severely, and her eyes, piercing, icy blue, were locked on the bench, ignoring everyone else in the room. As she raised her hand to take the oath, her eyes met his directly, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to plummet. Oscar's heart stuttered violently. He knew those eyes. He knew the proud angle of her jaw. He had seen that exact unwavering stare 15 years ago in a cold, echoing hallway. It couldn't be. But the name, Olivia Bennett, echoed in his skull like a death knell. I do, she said, her voice calm but layered with tempered steel. She took her seat, adjusted the microphone, and stared, unblinking, at the man trembling in the black robe. Oscar's hands began to shake. He pressed them against his desk to hide the tremor. Olivia Bennett, the little girl from the hallway, the daughter of Thomas Bennett, the ghost of the man he had buried alive. Ms. Bennett, Henderson began, unaware of the psychological warfare unfolding beside him. Could you state your qualifications for the record? I hold a master's degree in forensic accounting from Yale, graduating summa cum laude, Olivia said. I spent 5 years as a senior auditor for the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit before being recruited by the DOJ's Anti-Corruption Division. I specialize in tracking dark money, offshore evasion, and institutional racketeering. Every word was a nail driven into Oscar's coffin. And regarding the Vanguard Logistics case, Henderson continued, what did your federal audit reveal? Objection. The lead defense attorney, Vance, shot up. This witness was added at the 11th hour. We haven't had time to review her findings. This is an unconstitutional ambush. Oscar's mouth was dust. This was his out, handed to him on a silver platter. He could sustain the objection, strike her testimony, throw her out under the guise of procedural fairness. He opened his mouth to speak, but meeting Olivia's gaze, he found his voice paralyzed. A faint, knowing, almost pitying smile ghosted across her lips. It said, I dare you. Try to stop what's coming. Overruled, he croaked, his voice a pathetic rasp that shocked the entire room, including the court reporter. The witness may proceed. Vance sank back into his chair, exchanging a baffled look with his co-counsel. Judge Dunn never overruled them on Vanguard matters. Something was horribly wrong. Thank you, Your Honor, Olivia said, the polite words tasting like poison in the air. My audit revealed that Vanguard Logistics is not a functioning corporate entity. It has no real employees, no freight manifests, no physical assets. It is a laundering node. And the laundered money didn't just return to street operations. Tens of millions were funneled into the blind trusts of several highly placed public officials. The courtroom erupted into scandalized murmurs. Reporters sat up straight, smelling blood. Oscar gripped his desk until his knuckles went white. He was staring at a ghost, a phantom he'd created 15 years ago out of pure greed, and she had crawled back from the dead to drag him to hell. His mind snapped back to a freezing December evening, 15 years prior. Back then, Oscar wasn't a judge. He was an ambitious prosecutor angling for the district attorney's office. He'd been handed a career-making case. Nearly $40 million had vanished from a municipal pension fund, and the public was out for blood. The true culprits were powerful men, aldermen, developers, syndicate bosses, who could guarantee Oscar's rise to a judgeship if he protected them, and his ruin if he didn't. They needed a scapegoat. Oscar found the perfect one. Thomas Bennett, the fund's senior accountant, a quiet, honest man who discovered the discrepancies himself and brought 3 boxes of meticulous ledgers to Oscar, believing in the justice system, trusting Oscar to protect him. That very night, Oscar fed Thomas's original ledgers into a shredder. In their place, using the resources of the men backing him, he fabricated a flawless paper trail of forged transfers and falsified emails, pinning the entire theft on the innocent accountant. The trial was a slaughter. Oscar painted Thomas as a calculating mastermind who'd stolen the retirements of thousands of police officers and teachers. Thomas, bewildered and betrayed, begged the jury to believe him, and was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 30 years at MDC Chicago. 6 months into his sentence, Thomas, a gentle man who'd never been in a fight in his life, was beaten to death with a steel pipe in the prison laundry room. Officially, gang violence. Unofficially, Oscar knew the syndicate had tied up a loose end. The day of the conviction, Oscar walked out of the courtroom feeling like an untouchable god, until he was confronted in the hallway by Thomas's devastated wife and 12-year-old daughter. The wife sobbed on her knees, but the girl, Olivia, did not cry. She stood in the middle of the corridor, forcing Oscar to stop, and stared up at him with icy, unblinking eyes. You lied, she whispered. You killed him. I am going to remember everything about you. Oscar had scoffed and brushed past the child, going out to celebrate his promotion. Over the years, wine and luxury dulled the memory, but he never forgot that hollow stare. Now, 15 years later, that girl was a woman sitting a few feet away, holding the threads of his entire existence in her steady hands. You mentioned public officials, Henderson said, suddenly energized. Can you name the individuals who received these laundered funds? Objection, Vance screamed, leaping up. Relevance, prejudice, Your Honor. This is a wild goose expedition into unnamed officials. She's poisoning the jury pool. Oscar's heart pounded. He had to shut this down, hold her in contempt, clear the courtroom, seal the transcripts, anything. He raised his gavel, hand trembling. But Olivia's icy eyes pinned him to his chair. Her expression was a silent roar. Do it. Sustain the objection. Try to run. It won't save you. The objection is, Oscar choked, sweat drenching his back. He looked at the packed gallery, full of reporters from every major outlet. If he shut down testimony about corrupt officials protecting a mob front, the optics would be disastrous. It would trigger a federal inquiry. He was trapped. Overruled. The witness will answer the question. Vance looked at Oscar as if he'd grown a second head. Thank you, Your Honor, Olivia said. She pulled out a sleek black ledger. Oscar's breath hitched. It looked exactly like the ledgers her father used to carry. I have verified, unredacted bank records obtained via international subpoena from the Cayman Islands and the Bank of Geneva. The funds from Vanguard were routed through a shell company called Apex Holdings. The sole beneficiary has received over $12 million in untraceable offshore bribes over the last decade. And who exactly is that man? Henderson asked. The courtroom went dead silent. Olivia turned her entire body to face the bench. The beneficiary, she said, her voice echoing with the finality of a falling guillotine, is sitting right in front of me. The Honorable Judge Oscar Dunn. Pandemonium. Reporters scrambled, shouting questions. The gallery erupted in gasps. Vance and his team jumped up, screaming objections. The noise dialed down to an electrified hum. Every eye in the room stared at Oscar, whose face had gone a mottled purple. How dare you? Oscar hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Olivia. How dare you utter such slanderous, defamatory lies? Bailiff, take this insane woman into custody. The bailiff, who'd served loyally in Oscar's court for 12 years, took a hesitant step forward, torn between duty and the shocking accusation from a credentialed federal agent. He didn't reach for his cuffs. They aren't lies, Oscar, Olivia said, dropping the title Your Honor entirely, a small omission that sent a shockwave through the room. And I am not in contempt. I am here executing a federal warrant. Warrant? I have absolute immunity. I demand to speak to the Attorney General this instant. Account number 449B at the Bank of Geneva, Olivia continued, cutting through his panic like a blade. She opened the ledger. Opened December 14th, exactly 15 years ago, 2 days after you convicted an innocent man to death in MDC Chicago. Initial deposit, $2 million. The exact price of your soul, wasn't it? Oscar collapsed back into his chair. She didn't just have suspicions. She had it all. You see, Olivia said, stepping down into the well of the court, ignoring the sputtering defense attorneys. When you sent my father to a violent prison, you thought you'd buried the problem. But you only buried a seed. I spent 15 years studying. I went to Yale. I joined the DOJ specifically to hunt down the rot in this city's justice system. I didn't just look at the ledgers. I looked at the metadata, the shell proxies, the routing numbers. And I started with you. This is a vendetta, Oscar yelled, desperation cracking his voice. A personal, psychotic vendetta by an unstable, grieving woman. Everything she says is inadmissible. It's not a vendetta. It's a verified federal audit, Olivia said. For 3 years I've traced your dark money. Every bribe to dismiss a syndicate case, every payoff from the Maroney family, every wire transfer to renovate your Winnetka estate. It's all right here. She slammed the ledger onto the prosecutor's table. Complete, irrefutable proof of federal RICO violations, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit capital murder. Murder, Henderson gasped. My father didn't die in a random prison fight, Olivia said, walking right up to the bench, forcing Oscar to look down at her. The power in the room had completely inverted. You ordered the hit to ensure he never filed an appeal exposing your forged documents. You paid a corrupt guard $50,000 from a Cayman account to unlock the laundry room doors and look away. I tracked that payment. I tracked the guard down. He cut a federal plea deal at 3 o'clock this morning. He gave you up, Oscar. He gave us everything. Oscar couldn't breathe. The walls of his kingdom were crashing down around him. He looked around wildly for an escape, but before he could move, the oak doors swung open again. A dozen agents in tactical windbreakers marked FBI poured into the courtroom, securing every exit. Judge Oscar Dunn, the lead agent said, flashing his shield, "You are under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit capital murder." Judge Oscar Dunn, the lead agent said, flashing his shield, "You are under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit capital murder." and the premeditated murder of Thomas Bennett. We have a signed warrant to seize your assets, freeze your accounts, and remand you into federal custody without bail. You can't arrest me in my own courtroom, Oscar screamed, standing so fast his chair crashed against the wall. I have immunity. I demand my phone. I demand the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the one who signed the warrant, Olivia said softly. Oscar stared down at her. For the first time in his miserable life, he felt pure, paralyzing terror. He saw the 12-year-old girl in the hallway again, standing triumphant over the ruins of his life. She hadn't just defeated him. She had annihilated him, taken his reputation, his stolen wealth, his freedom, and shattered them all. Hands behind your back, Mr. Dunn, the agent ordered. They grabbed his arms roughly, without the deference usually given to a judge, and cuffed him. The metallic ratchet of the cuffs was the loudest, most terrifying sound Oscar had ever heard. It sounded exactly like the final strike of a gavel. You ruined my life, Oscar hissed as they marched him down from the bench. You vindictive. I simply balanced the ledger, Olivia interrupted calmly, stepping out of his path. You built a mansion on my father's grave, Oscar. I'm just bringing the wrecking ball. As they paraded him through the well of the court, camera flashes blinded him, capturing his humiliated, purple face and the cuffs biting into his wrists. Olivia stood entirely still, watching him go. She didn't smile. There was no gloating, only a deep, settling peace. The weight she'd carried for 15 years finally lifted from her shoulders. Court is adjourned, she whispered to the empty room. The fall of Judge Oscar Dunn dominated the national news for 6 months. The media tore apart every lavish detail of the life he'd funded with blood money. Public outrage forced the state governor to publicly condemn him. The Maroney syndicate, realizing he was now a toxic liability, abandoned him entirely, taking their lawyers and dark money with them. Stripped of his millions, connections, and power, Oscar was represented by an overworked public defender who visibly despised him. Olivia sat in the front row every day of the trial. She didn't need to testify again. Her exhaustive forensic report and the flipped testimonies of corrupt officials and prison guards were more than enough. She simply watched karma do its work. When the jury returned a guilty verdict on all 42 federal counts after just 3 hours of deliberation, Oscar didn't react. Within months, his silver hair turned entirely white. The arrogant sneer was replaced by a mask of twitching terror. The presiding judge, a younger colleague Oscar had once bullied and passed over for promotion, showed zero mercy. Oscar Dunn was sentenced to life in federal prison without parole. Because of the high-profile nature of his crimes and his intimate knowledge of the syndicate, the Bureau of Prisons struggled to find him a secure facility. 2 weeks later, the rusted iron doors of MDC Chicago slammed shut behind him. Stripped of his dignity and handed an orange jumpsuit, he was marched down the corridor toward cell block C as inmates banged their cups against the bars. Word had traveled fast. The executioner was in the house. The man who'd handed out thousands of years in cruel sentences was now trapped in the very cage he loved to throw broken people into. Oscar's legs gave out. He saw the dead, violent eyes of men he'd once sentenced staring back at him. Thrown into his tiny cell, he collapsed onto the thin mattress, pulling his knees to his chest, shaking. Looking up at the small barred window and its pathetic sliver of gray Chicago light, he finally understood, with absolute certainty, that he would die in this building. The same cold prison where he'd sent an innocent man to die 15 years earlier. The ledger of his life was finally balanced to zero. Miles away, in a sunlit federal office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Olivia Bennett closed a heavy file folder labeled Done, Oscar. She locked it away in a steel drawer and walked to the window. The city looked cleaner today. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver pocket watch, her father's, recovered from evidence, and polished it gently with her thumb, feeling its steady tick. She smiled softly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, and walked out into the warm, waiting sunlight.